Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Shield,
And I'm Benjamin Shield.
and we want to welcome you to Getting Inside the Right Male Mind. We're very excited to be here, and today we have an interesting subject. Uh, this actually came from one of our listeners, so I talked about this earlier in the week on my lunch with Lisa, but it's one thing to hear about porn and porn addiction from a female perspective. It's a very, very different thing to hear about it from a man and a male perspective. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about porn and porn addiction from a guy's perspective. So, honey, let's just dive in. And first of all, I want to ask you, why do men, and it's not just men, by the way, but why do so many men watch porn?
Well, I think it's a natural attraction for men to look at suggestive pictures. And I remember when I was just, an adolescent, getting a Playboy magazine, being able to buy one from a liquor store, you're buying combs and gum and things like that. And think you just slip it in there, and sometimes it works, that the guy will sell it to you. And back then, like a Playboy magazine was absolutely risque. It was the height of eroticism, in literature.
Did you ever read the articles or did you mostly look at the pictures?
Pictures, the cartoons.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I think it's just a natural thing that young men are drawn to. I think that what happens and what happened both with men and with society is that what used to be tame and that was considered risque but was relatively tame became boring, and that both society and individual men needed more and more and more. And as it became more accessible, it became, for a lot of men, an obsession.
Mm-hmm. And I am curious, when you're looking at pictures of these beautiful, like stunningly beautiful women naked who are not the norm. Most women don't look like that. And you are seeing this at such an early age. How does that affect your perception of real women?
Well, I think these young men, as they get older, lose their attraction for in real life women.
Mm-hmm.
Just and what's true sensuality is. They mistake sexuality for sensuality,
Mm-hmm.
and they mistake fantasy for intimacy.
And one of the things I know, older porn, like from the 70s, is very different than pornography today. In the 70s, you actually had people who knew each other. It was a much
Right.
smaller group of porn stars. They all knew each other. They actually were friends.
And the videos had stories to
Yeah.
them, had beginning, middle, and end, and it wasn't just one sexual scene after another.
Yeah, there was still something going on, and there was the storyline, and the people had real sex. It wasn't like you had the wind machine and the couple standing on the beach, and it was all perfect the way magazines are perfect now, the way almost everything has been retouched. And so I think for women, it's hard for us, and we feel very threatened by men looking at porn because we don't look like the women in those magazines and in those movies.
Yeah, and I think that women are also threatened because what started out in Playboy magazines and maybe pornography earlier last century, where women are adored, you know, that it's turned it more into misogyny,
Mhm.
where women are not only objects but objects of abuse
Mhm.
in many ways.
In many ways. Yeah. Um, why do men, or why do you think men get addicted to porn?
Well, I think it's easy. You know, you don't have to deal with relationship. You don't have to deal with sexual performance.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that uh, it's very personal, like any addiction, whether it's overeating or drug use. It's this very personal thing that people keep hidden from
Mhm.
other people, and those secrets keep couples or um, the individual who's addicted separate from other people. And it they not only devalue women in the pornography, but they begin to devalue the woman in the relationship.
Mhm.
And ultimately, they begin to devalue themselves.
Because it's hard to separate the fantasy from the reality.
Yeah.
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 And I think what happens is there's no emotional connection and relationship with the woman on the computer screen or in the magazine. But when you have a real partner and there's fighting or arguing, or she has a headache or whatever, you know, it's a whole different relationship, because the man feels rejected and he can turn to the porn because
Mhm.
it feels uplifting. There's no rejection. The woman on the screen is always ready and available
24/7.
24/7.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And there's such a thing. I mean, everyone will have their own view on it. But in many instances, for many individuals and many couples, um, that watching porn can be a spice of
Mhm.
life. And with porn addiction, it becomes the entree and it overtakes other important parts of the person's life. It can interfere with work. It could interfere with relationship. It can interfere with um, feeling.
Mhm.
And so, what can be in in many instances, and of course not all, we all have different upbringing and moral codes, but in many instances, what could be a spice for both women and men and couples um, overtake people's lives, and instead of creating more sexuality, it actually decreases um, uh, their sense of sexuality, because like any addiction, people not only need more and more and more, but with sexual addiction, with porn addiction, that men will often go to more and more obscure, kinky, um, and some ways harmful
Yeah.
sites.
Yeah. And I really want to invite listeners to weigh in. If there's anyone who thinks she or might be involved with a porn addict, please feel free to comment. If there are any men listening who are struggling with this, please, also feel free to comment. And I also want to just put it out there. As a coach, when I was coaching, for 14 years, I worked with couples, I worked with single men, and I worked with single women. And many of these couples and many of the men were addicted to porn. And one of the places that I suggested they go was a place in Los Angeles called the Center for Healthy Sex. It's in Santa Monica. It is a wonderful facility. They use the 12 steps, and they have in-house workshops that they do to try to help men with porn addiction get over their addictions. They have therapists there who work with men directly, and they can work remotely. So please reach out to them. It's the Center for Healthy Sex in Santa Monica, California. It was insidious to see what this did in Los Angeles. We had a preponderance of very beautiful, attractive people. And it didn't matter how beautiful the women were. It didn't matter how beautiful the couple was. The porn addiction really caused so much harm and damage to the couple. It was humiliating for the guy, shameful, because he knew he was doing something wrong, but he couldn't stop it. And there's a lot of support with men. Maybe you can talk about this. With men, it's like, oh, yeah, hey, we all watch porn. And I think very few men would look at a friend and say, oh, you're addicted to this, right? It's very widely accepted among men, but I think it's shameful for men when it comes to their relationships if they are addicted and they can't perform sexually.
Yeah, and I think that where men will admit to watching porn, I think most men won't admit to the type of porn they're seeing, the fantasies they're having, the amount of porn they're watching. So I think men will just generally say, yeah, I watch porn, but they won't, another man won't question beyond that because it's intensely private and shameful.
Yeah.
You know, if one were to actually describe the porn site that they're watching, it would be shameful.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a very private thing. And something you said earlier about Los Angeles and so many beautiful women, I think that pornography has been so inculcated into society that the beautiful women, many of them are try to replicate what a man would see on the screen: breast enhancements, plastic surgery, things like that, things to cosmetic techniques to make a woman look younger, instead of just naturally, aging, accepting our bodies, loving our bodies. I feel that the effect it's had on women is that they are less satisfied with themselves.
Yeah. That's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. It is very, very hard for women growing older to embrace aging, especially because when we look around at the images that we see all the time, it's not of women who look real. Here in Santa Fe, it's actually, since we moved from Los Angeles to Santa Fe, you have a lot of the Georgia O'Keeffe women, these very strong, gray-haired women who are a lot more in touch with aging and a lot more comfortable with it. And it's a whole different scene here to see that. A lot of women don't do any enhancements at all. And it's really a whole different thing. Yeah.
And I think that it's so shameful for a man to admit what he's watching and the fantasies he's having, that he'll often take the fantasies from watching pornography into the bedroom and either try to reenact or enact those fantasies with a partner, which the partner becomes more of an object than an intimate co-creator of loving physical relationship. And I think if a woman sensed that a man was living out his fantasy, or just trying to get excited because the fantasies of pornography are the only things that excite him, that a woman would be devastated. Devastated.
Well, and I think a lot of women sense that something is really wrong, but what we do is we blame ourselves. We think oh, he's not into me anymore. He doesn't find me attractive. And then we start criticizing ourselves. I need to lose weight. I need to, whatever. And it's hard on us. We just default to blaming ourselves and thinking we're the problem, not even realizing that there's something else going on. Well, let's talk first. I wanted to read something about addiction that I think is really important. This is something I found online, and it's from Medical News Today. It's very, very important to understand what an addiction is. Many people who don't identify as having an addiction or who don't really know any addicts, they don't understand what really happens when you have an addiction. So, an addiction is more than just an intense interest in something. It is a medical condition that changes the brain and the body and causes the person to feel compelled to continue using a substance or partaking in an activity, even when doing so may cause harm. Most research into addiction suggests that it activates regions in the brain associated with motivation and reward. Specifically, addiction alters the body's dopamine system. When a person with addiction initially uses the substance or engages in the behavior, they receive an intense rush of dopamine, causing feelings of pleasure and reward. Over time, their body may produce less dopamine and rely on the substance or behavior to feel the dopamine rush. Sex can be a highly rewarding behavior in terms of dopamine. Using pornography may also activate the dopamine system, potentially leading to addiction. Addiction affects other aspects of the brain as well, steadily changing it and making it increasingly difficult for the person to avoid the addictive substance or behavior. And one other thing I want to add is that many addictions like alcohol and drugs and food and sex and all, those addictions can be genetic or hereditary. They are passed down through family systems, and they are part of obsessive compulsive behavior. And usually there is a familial component to those addictions. So you will find families that have addiction throughout the family system. If you're dating somebody and that person has an alcoholic parent or sibling, you really want to take that into account when you're dating somebody, because it could very well mean that your partner has an active or inactive addiction. And addiction, sometimes partners or people who grew up in family systems where there was an addiction, they will just say, okay, I watched my mother or my father drink himself to death, and I'm not going to have any alcohol. But that doesn't mean that just because that person isn't drinking alcohol, that they don't have some other kind of addiction. So this is insidious. This isn't specifically a discussion on addiction in general, but it's very, very important to pay attention to these things. If you have addiction in your family background, you also may have addictions that you're not seeing. So it's important to pay attention to that as well. And it may cause you to be attracted to addicts. So this is a system that just keeps playing out over and over and over again until somebody stops and gets help and does the work to break the system. Your children will also inherit this if you're not careful. It's a very, very, very difficult thing to escape. And my father was an alcoholic. He died from alcoholism in his 70s. And I've dealt with addiction, with food, with alcohol myself. So it's important to be honest, to be humble, to be real about these things. Where I'm going with this is porn is a very separate class in of its own. So with porn, anybody can get addicted to porn. Anyone. You do not have to have a family member or somebody who in your system was addicted to pornography. It is so highly addictive. And it is such an easy escape in relationship when things aren't going well. It is very easy when you're feeling disconnected from your primary partner to then go and default to watching porn. And one of the problems with porn, especially online, is that it really does mimic a lot of the psychological stimulation. You're online, it's like you're chasing, you're looking for the perfect woman. You're there, you're opening up different sites. No, not her, not her, not her. And it's almost like going into a bar and flirting with women and trying to hit on a particular woman who you're attracted to.
Without any risk of rejection.
Right. And so then you find a woman who you are very attracted to online, and then you start engaging and watching porn and getting off to this woman, and it gives you the feeling of the chase and then getting the woman, only, as Benjamin said, without any risk of rejection. And the excitement and the whole process of doing that is so highly stimulating that it is very, very, very easy to get addicted to that process because of the way the process is. We have some of our clients who actually find that swiping on the apps brings up a certain, that same kind of addiction. And these are not necessarily women who would say, oh, I have an addictive personality. A lot of these women get addicted to swiping in the same way that a guy might get addicted to porn. So this is, it works on the brain and on the dopamine reward system, and it's insidious. So anybody can get addicted to porn, and especially any man. One of the things I know, babe, excuse me, one of the things I know that is really challenging for men in general is all the visual stimulation that they see. I really want you to talk for a second what it's like, especially as a younger man, to be surrounded by women in high heels and short skirts and low-cut blouses, or being in Los Angeles with all those billboards of half-naked women in lingerie or Carl's Jr. ads staring down at you. What is that like for you as a man?
Well, it's not just the obvious things that are cultural stimulants, but just watching like police shows on television. They're all, all the women are great looking, and they're also accessible. Besides being strong and smart, they seem accessible and sensuous. So that's constant, even if one isn't going outside and looking at billboards or seeing ads in a magazine, or just going to an event where women are, where people are dressed, to be attractive. So all of this stimuli comes in, and then a man can sit in front of the computer and fantasize that they're making love to someone like that they've seen on TV, that they've seen on a billboard, they've seen in a magazine ad, they've seen at a venue.
Yeah, because one of the things I know when a man is trying to get in recovery for porn addiction is they have to have limits and blocks on their computer because it's so easy to just go down that rabbit hole. But also when they go out in the world, it's inescapable. Even if they're trying not to engage in porn in other ways, it's these images are all around, and it's almost impossible. I can't remember the film that we watched. Do you remember the film about?
There were two films.
Yeah, that came out around the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. They were excellent. Excellent. One was a bit more about not just porn, but sexual addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And one was strictly about porn addiction with, I think the last name, it's a double name, Levitt something.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, they were both excellent because they were just in one film, and we almost saw them back to back. He was just describing that, you know, he doesn't have to perform. He doesn't have to worry about making his partner, that she'll have an orgasm, that and it became boring for him to try to, you know, please a partner that may take a little longer than he would take. So
Was it Don John, honey?
yes, I think
Was that one of them?
that was one.
Yeah, that was one. Don
And
John.
yeah, with Gordon.
Yeah,
Gordon
Levitt. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then there was a second one that came out right around the same
And that
time.
was with Tim. Oh, I'm trying to remember
Is it
the name.
the one that
He
was?
was married to Susan Sarandon.
Yeah.
Tim.
Huh. I can't. Yeah. Somebody will know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the second film, but anyway, those were two excellent films, and it was crazy how hard it is to get, you know, it's like having a food addiction. You have to eat 3 times a day.
Yeah.
You have to eat. It's not like you can stop eating.
Mhm.
And with porn or sex addiction, it's everywhere. The images and all. It's you can't turn on the television, like you said, or watch a cop show without being inundated with all of those images. So it's really rough. Let's talk a little bit. You know, something that's very important to say is that viewing porn doesn't mean you'll become addicted.
Mhm. Right. Right. Again, it could be a spice
Mhm.
of life. It could be a way of self-care, self-pleasure. And it, like so many things that, particularly if someone has an addictive behavior, can get out of control.
Yeah.
Tim Robbins.
Tim Robbins
right.
was who it was. Yeah. So it was Tim Robbins. And he also did a film about porn addiction. I'm seeing if I can find the name of it. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mark Ruffalo was in it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, both of those films, Don John and Thanks for Sharing, excellent films. And if you really want to get inside the mind of somebody who's going through this, both of these films were terrific. So let's talk about something that's I think was really important to discuss. You know, it's very difficult to have a healthy relationship with an addict, right? Especially if your partner is addicted to porn.
Yeah. First, he's keeping a secret from the partner, and any secret separates people.
Well, in addiction, addicts just lie. There's so much shame around not being able to stop the addiction. and they know what they're doing is wrong, but they can't stop it. And so they're lying to themselves, they're lying to their partners.
They're in denial that it's harmful.
Yeah, when I was coaching couples, one time woman said that she came home and she found all of the photographs of she and her husband turned upside down
Mhm.
because he was engaging in porn and he had forgotten to put the photos back up. And another woman said that her partner had put post-it notes over her face in all the pictures and forgot to take the post-it notes off. And it was just devastating for these women.
And I think it creates distance also because taking the fantasies of the pornography into the bedroom,
Mhm.
that it's easy for a man to objectify his partner.
Mhm.
And so the sex becomes less intimate and more acting out. And she becomes more of an object.
Mhm.
And very often, because with addiction, people need more and more and more, that the man needs to act out more in the bedroom, and
Mhm.
the woman becomes more and more objectified.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the porn addiction interferes with the man's ability to have a normal, healthy relationship.
And sometimes even to have a normal sexual function. I
Right.
think it could lead to erectile dysfunction.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. Um, it's not a whole lot different than having an affair.
Right, right. Because we're taking something that should be in the core relationship between two people, and uh, and having that outside the primary relationship.
Yeah. So let's talk about some signs that to look for for women in particular. And again, there are some women who are addicted to porn as well. It's not only men, but it is a much, much, much smaller number of women compared to men. Honey, what percentage of men do you think honestly watch porn?
Well, I think my sense is probably 100% have watched porn. Um, it's hard to say what percent um, of that porn watching begins to interfere with their lives. But
Mhm.
I would say that I really don't think that, at least of unless someone is quite old, but and has lost general interest. But I would say it's just part of being a guy.
Uh-huh. So, some signs. So the first one is that your partner has become more withdrawn,
Hmm.
right?
Right, because like any addiction, it's so personal and shameful, and they're in self-denial, and they don't want any light to be shown on it, so they
Right. So,
keep it hidden.
and they want to spend more time alone
Mhm.
because that's when they engage in porn,
Yeah.
right? So the second thing is he's spending an excessive amount of time online.
Right, and often with the subterfuge that he's working late or has to check the computer for emails that are coming in, and they'll sneak in viewing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then another is that a partner seems emotionally absent from the relationship.
Yeah, because their mind is on fantasies, on something that's not real, and which is a lot easier for some men than to actually deal with um, the emotions of a relationship,
Mhm.
someone else's emotion, not feeling they're enough for the partner, or not feeling that the partner isn't enough for them.
Mhm. And then the fourth one is that your partner becomes increasingly critical of your body or overall appearance because you don't look like the women in the
Yeah,
films or
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and it's like that's the women in the film are probably the top 1 percentile, you know, and so it really creates an unreal expectation, but also a level of, it raises the bar of what can excite a man.
Mhm. Yeah. And then your partner's sexual tastes have changed.
Yeah, and as we spoke about before, that like any addiction, people need more and more. And with porn addiction, it's easy to go into that, fall into that rabbit hole
Mhm.
of, well, I'm not just interested in vanilla pictures, or videos. I need more and more and more. And that creates even more shame because they're really going into kind of alt
Mhm.
categories.
Yep. And the sixth one is he's evasive, lying, defensive, or secretive.
Hmm. Yeah. And which is true because any addiction
Mhm.
is necessitates secrecy, and secrecy creates distance.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, to know is that often when porn addiction is involved, the woman is initiating all of the sex.
Mm.
The woman is initiating, the man is not coming to her for that, and which is pretty unusual in a relationship, especially a newer relationship. And if you're young,
Yeah.
two people would be having sex, and a man would be engaging with sex with his partner
And pursuing.
and pursuing. He wouldn't just lose interest out of the blue unless there was a lot of volatility in the relationship. So, you know, these are some warnings, right? If you're noticing any of those signs that we just mentioned, it isn't going to get better. If you stay and you tolerate the behavior, you're enabling him.
Yeah.
You become codependent with him. So whenever there's an addict, there is often a codependent who is what is called the enabler. And you're there, you're trying to change him and fix him and be there and be his support system, even when you know that he isn't taking responsibility for his life. And it starts to drain you because you take the focus off of your own mental health and well-being and your own needs to focus on helping someone else at your own expense. And then that devolves into codependency. So, your best bet is to confront your partner in a non-threatening, non-blaming way and insist that he tell you what's really going on. If he refuses, then you need to go to couples counseling. And if he refuses that as well, then you got to end the relationship.
And even with that, because um, watching excessive porn, having porn addiction can lead to kind of desensitization of a real intimate relationship that after a while or with treatment, they become desensitized to the porn.
Mhm.
And so they start seeking out other addictions, other other pathways for that dopamine
Rush.
rush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you do break up with somebody who has a porn addiction, do not get back into the relationship unless he's getting help. And if he doesn't get help, do not go back. You deserve to have a healthy partner who makes you a priority in his life and not someone who makes porn his top priority. So be very, very, very careful if you do discover this. Knowing what I know about addiction, when I was dating before I met you, haven't dated since, but when I was dating before we met, I was dating a man who I knew he wasn't my life partner, but he was a very nice man and I enjoyed his company. And at the time, he was a lovely partner. And one night he got completely drunk, and it was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He was the sweetest guy, the sweetest, most caring, loving, kind-hearted man. And then he drank and he turned into a monster. It was like this whole other person came out. And the following day, he begged me to stay in the relationship. But because of what I know about addiction, I was very clear that there was no way, even if this was something that had only happened once, I didn't need to stick around to see it happen again. And I said to him, look, you need to get help. And he said he would go to AA. He said he would get help. And I said, you need to do that. But I've been down that road. I know what's involved. And I don't need to go down that road again, but you do. And that was the end of that relationship. I walked away, I cut it off, and I didn't look back. And I felt so proud of myself to have that kind of clarity, because I knew that nothing was going to change. It was going to take him years. If he even stuck with it and stayed in it, it would have taken him years to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And I didn't
Because
have,
it's more about just stopping drinking. It's
oh,
discovering the underlying causes of the addiction.
yeah, I mean, it's just a real commitment to changing those behaviors and looking at what's driving them. And so I knew I just didn't want to go down that road with him or anyone else at this point in life. So walk away, cut it off, because it's only going to be a source of ongoing misery. All right, everybody. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you for listening. I know this was an unusual topic for us, but neither one of us are addiction experts, but this is I have coached many, many people who have had sex addictions. I've seen how destructive it was for the partners, for them, how it ruined lives. I had one client who was so involved with his sex addiction that it cost him a fortune in prostitutes and all. And yeah, and it destroyed his career. It destroyed his life.
And it's not just in relationship.
No.
It's in the dating world.
Yeah.
Where these guys can be incredibly charming, get into sexual intimacy quickly, develop deep bonds for the women. The woman develops deep bonds, and then they go on to the next, because that's what addicts do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it really is. When you, as mature adults and people who are not just seeing what we want to see and trying to tell ourselves everything's going to be fine, but as you really start to look at these kinds of things, it can become very black and white. And getting involved with an addict of any kind is a really dark road. And it's going to become always about the addiction, and you will not save that person. The only person who can save him is himself. Truly, he is the only person who can save himself. And if we could really get that this is black and white, we are powerless, just as they are powerless over their own addiction. We are powerless over them and their addiction. Powerless. There's nothing you can do to save or change an addict. It is, and I understand if you are married to somebody and you have children and you need to try to work it out because of kids and and a marriage and responsibilities and all, that's a different story. But if you're out there dating and you are free to choose your partner and you find out that somebody that you're dating has a drug or alcohol or work addiction or shopping addiction, or even there are debting, money addictions. People have addictions to debting. So be very, very, very careful. There's gambling addictions, all kinds of things. But if you bump up against this and you can get out sooner than later, because it will only end in misery. All right.
All right.
Not a happy note to end on, but please, please, please go to lisashield.com, click the button to watch my free 45-minute presentation. If you like what you hear, we can jump on a call and I can show you how to find the guardian of your soul. A guy like this one right here. There are plenty of them out there. I promise you, I am not the only woman who struck gold. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So please watch my presentation. Please rate and like this podcast. It is so important to us that you do that. Also, give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Send us your suggestions to podcast@lisashield.com. We read every single email we get from you. And lastly, enjoy the rest of your day. And please tell your friends, your children, your husbands and brothers and sisters, and your aunts and uncles, even your mom and dad, anybody, your girlfriends, your guy friends, about this podcast. We would love, love, love to see the word spread. And we send you so much love out there in the dating world. For all of you who are still single, please, please, please do not give up. There are wonderful, wonderful people out there who are just like you, looking for somebody to share their lives with. And having a loving partner, especially in these uncertain times, is the greatest gift that anybody can ever give themselves. So please don't ever, ever, ever give up on your search for love. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.